you. Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? Great. So, ladies and even some gentlemen, I'm extremely excited to be here today, not just because most of, around when March comes in, I get invited to speak at a lot of events, which are the International Women's Day, but I think those events happen and then they fade out. What I'm excited about Meera Kaul Foundation is that this is not going to be a one-day thing, and it's something that they're going to take this forward. So it is very exciting, and I'm glad that all these men and women in black and azure have done a great job. So you guys rock. I'm glad to see that. Now, I've been a serial entrepreneur in a field like genomics. So most people, the first thing that they meet me is not about the subject. The first thing that most people talk about is, you're a woman entrepreneur. And if you're a woman entrepreneur, it must be very difficult. There's an obvious attachment of a certain kind of bias about that. The next thing that comes about is, if you're a woman entrepreneur, and if you're in a field like genomics or you're biotech, you must be similar to A, B, and C. And I think these sort of comparisons and similarities between other people are sort of because of the numbers of people that are currently in this area. So I think I just wanted to maybe go through a little bit of a background of mine so that you understand, why for me it comes up as a little bit of surprise, but as I grow up, why this changes. So I went to IIT Kharagpur to study physics, as I always wanted to do. Now, while I was doing that, it did not seem like an odd decision for me, given the family I was born in. I also did not think it was odd to win the Nobel Prize while I was growing up, right? Now, things definitely changed over the years as we went along. But one of the things that made a big difference was that I was encouraged to dream. And not only was I encouraged to dream, I was allowed to pursue whatever dream I had. So once I got into college and I went and decided to be an entrepreneur, it wasn't that I was told that, why did you change your mind? Why did you make a decision to become an entrepreneur? I was encouraged. And I think I was encouraged, but also told that any decision that you take is going to affect you. The decision is yours, the consequences are yours. I think for that, I'm the most grateful to having the family and the support that I always had. So I think as I grew up, I found out that I was privileged, and I was born in an ensconced environment where everything that I did was enabled by the environment that was around me. And that wasn't the same for most people in my country, most people in India who were wanting to have a career. Forget STEM. STEM was this faraway taboo thing that most people did not want to do. So what I decided that I'm going to speak on today is going to be about some of the more common issues that we have in STEM and how we actually address them. In order to make this more meaningful, I've decided to take a common theme, and that's going to be trees. And you can understand why I took it as trees, because we're talking about STEMs. So I thought, what best but to look at trees. So he said, if we want to really actually have a consistent impact on women in STEM, we must take a very systemic treatment towards this. Now, treatment might be spelled differently, but in this case, it is this way. So let me move on to the next thing. So what is really the pity matter, right? What we are trying to see is that when you start off, when most women start off, girls are the crown jewels. If you look at any school in India today, most of them would be women who are topping these schools. And the other encouraging thing is that you look at the numbers from the last 10 years, you find that women have doubled the numbers that have gone into schools as well as colleges. But if you look at anybody, and if I look at myself and I look at my class, I found that women consistently were the crown jewels in the class, were the top 3 or top 4 in the class always, consistently. So then what happens? Why is it that something really changes? So I'm going to talk a little bit about why women are the crown jewels, then discuss why she actually leaves from there, move to the root of the problem, and then say, why do they branch away from STEM? And then look at solutions. So let me go through the next step, right? So I discussed about saying, we are constantly #1 in colleges and schools. We outrank boys in colleges as well. But at the end of the day, so you start off with 100, you start coming up, you're still 49% of the workforce. But when you look at women scientists and you look at technologists, we are getting down to 12 to 14% numbers. That's a really sad ratio. And when I look at this, you still find that there are a lot more Indian women in engineering and sciences than even in the US. And you find a lot of Indian women within the engineering and other fields that you find in the US who end up going and settling there. So there are very visible women within the workforce that we see. But in spite of all of that, we find that they really branch off after a certain point of time. After they get into college, after they do well, in mid-level careers, they all leave. Or not all leave, but a lot of people leave, right? So you're looking at very few women scientists that end up. You look at more women than men are actually dropping out of from mid-level careers, and they're underrepresented in top jobs. And the reason I say this is that when I was on the board of a large organization, which is the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, one of the things I kept harping about was saying, it's great we're doing all these programs for women, but if we do not have a woman director, it's going to be a hard thing for anybody to emulate, to really be able to say, I want to reach the top. So I'm glad that finally in 2013, we had the first woman director over there. So what is really the root of the problem? And I think most of us are very familiar with the root of the problem that we have, that there are a lot of gender stereotyping that are done, right? If you look at it, even people that all of us think do not have biases, we all have. And I remember this from one of the classes that I was at Harvard. There was this professor, Mahzarin Banaji, who said, you think you're not biased? We all said, no, we are not biased. And we finally, when we did the things that she asked us to do, we all found that we had hidden biases amongst us. And I think that's part of the problem, right? We all grew up with certain connections or certain assumptions about certain type of professions. We grew up with certain assumptions on why a person is expected to do a certain type of activity. And I think that sort of stereotyping is extremely dangerous to a society because you don't want to think beyond that. The second, obviously, is cultural barriers, right? As a girl in India, for most people you'll be expected to get into a certain kind of, get married at a certain age, have kids, and various other things. A lot of that means that you would not be able to actually pursue a career for a long period of time, and I think those make a big difference. The other important thing, and I think maybe when the Parity app comes out, we'll also find that a lot of times there's a lot of patronizing behavior towards women, especially if you are in a field that is not expected to be correlated to women. So for instance, yesterday I was extremely thrilled to see the hackathon with a lot of women, but I read certain posts which said that a lot of women do not want to be part of regular hackathon for reasons that include behaviors like patronizing behavior, because when women are reach that stage of getting to code, getting to do certain things, they really want to be independent and themselves. The other thing, obviously, is that there's low quality of education in most cases, and I think that needs to change across board. And finally, it's the choices we make. As women, we also have choices. I have a lot of friends who would have, are doctors who have gone through all of the education, but they made a conscious choice to not pursue a career like that. And I think that is something that we can't make a difference in. But why do they branch away from STEM, right? I mean, when you're doing well in a subject like physics, math, chemistry, in school, in college, what is it that really drives these women to actually get out of these careers? And I think it is the conditioning at home. It's the conditioning at home that makes a big difference in terms of how it's going to impact what you do at a later stage. There are not enough role models. I think what happens to a lot of us is that, like I said, on March 8th, when there is a Women's Day, you have a handful of women leaders who are expected to be, to go and speak at these various events. If we had a larger number of people who were there as role models, who were there as people, the numbers speak for themselves, right? So if you have 80 people in the room, and 80 women and 20 men, it would be the other way around. So it's about getting the right kind of numbers in place. And finally is the lack of mentors. Now, one of the things I've noticed, at least in India, is that there is suddenly a huge boom in terms of people trying to connect and being mentors. But mentors are not easy to get. And the reason for that is not that you can't sign up for being a mentor, but I think mentorship is much more deeper than just being written off as that. So how do we actually get to a solution based on this? And I think one of the big challenges that a lot of people think about is about policies. If you have the right kind of policies, you are likely to have a better outcome of getting more women to be excited about STEM. Now, India has a great policy in terms of having a nice a national policy for the empowerment of women. We also have the right of education and a lot of other acts. So from a policy perspective, I think India has done a great job. But from an execution perspective, I think it will still take a few years to actually get to a point where most women can actually get to the point where they are actually being able to use those acts or use that freedom or use that rights that they have to be able to get to what they dream about. And there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's underrepresentation at very senior levels. So how do you look at these budding women-only hackathons? And I'm glad to see that yesterday. I think these events are cool, right? These are good, not just as hackathons, but also women's networking things and all. But one of the things I think we all have to move beyond is to discuss about work-life balance. I think we all have to discuss about real problems. And I think, like yesterday, when I saw people were actually building an app, I think that excitement, the adrenaline of being able to build something, to create something, that is something I think if we had more of, this would be a different problem to solve. So there's a lot of interest in events like that, right? But the amount of success that we see, at least in India, I've attended a few of these hackathons. One of the things is you can see a large number of signups, but you see that there's a limited number of people that actually end up coming there. It could be reasons that they want to get there, which is a good sign, but they don't actually get there. So I think that is one of the things that we need to get to a point where not just are we showing interest, which is the first good sign, but you also need to get to a point where you can actually get them more engaged. And I think at the end of the day, time and numbers will actually change that game. So how do we look at it from saying, do we need to bark away to glory, right? That's one of the biggest things that we don't do as women. We don't talk about our successes. We don't want to talk about the greatness of all the women that we have. We talk about a few, and then they get over and over exaggerated within media. So if you look at institutions, I don't know how many of you have seen that picture of these sari-clad women from ISRO who had sent this mission to Mars. And there they are celebrating their big success. I think that picture was a great hit, that everybody looked at it and said, wow, you are traditionally dressed in a sari, you have these flowers, and yet these are the women, these are the scientists that actually could make the mission to Mars possible. And I think those kind of things, they break that mold of saying, if you are expected to be, this is how you dress, means you cannot do something. And I think that was, for me, was a great example of how do we actually break that mindset of people. The second is also, I looked at a certain kinds of, there's an Institute for International Education that is doing some great work on that, on women in STEM. On the NGO front, I have looked at a certain, at least I know there are many more, but there is the Anita Borg Institute that I've seen in India that is doing great work in this area. There's also another institution called the FAT, the Feminist Approach to Technology. And finally, I think few of the large companies, they realize that the workforce that they can get from women engineers is very large, and they need to encourage that. So a lot of these big, large institutions like TCS, Microsoft, and Intel all have specific STEM-related accelerators, programs, and so on. And I think that is a good initiative. As long as we start seeing the numbers increase, I think that will be a great way of being able to increase that. So now we look at certain seeds of inspiration. And here I'm going to pick role models, which are great. The people who have done extraordinarily well, who are well known, I think they are great. Second is the parents and peers. If you had people in your class that did extremely well and they were women, I'm sure that most of the spirits of competition would have arisen and people would want to do that. So I want to take a case study of 3 women who went to school with me in IIT Kharagpur. And the reason I'm taking this is because it gives you an example of what happens. These were all privileged women who have gone through IIT and they're there. And the reason I picked them up is saying there are three of, let's say, take Professor Nilima Nigam. She was studying physics, moved to mathematics. Today, she is a professor in Simon Fraser University teaching math. Now, the reason I find this very interesting is that I often talk to her about saying, what is her passion? And one of the things that she talks about is saying, how do you get more women to do research? So she did a few things where she would get students from India, get them to Canada, and see what happens to them from the starting of the program towards the end. And one of the most interesting things that she pointed out was that when people came in first from India and they wanted to do research, their expression of interest said 70% of them would actually follow research after they graduate from the program. What happened at the end of the program was that this number dropped tremendously, right? So 15% only remained after that. So what does this mean? Does it mean that we are just expecting to say that we will remain in this field and then drop out? And when you look at the reasons that they had mentioned, they all mentioned family reasons and things like that that made them, force them to drop out. So I think this is a good sign of saying that means these women were interested, but we need to do something to actually change that dynamic of moving it from 70%, which falls down drastically, to about 15%. The second person is a person called Mandy Pan. Now, if you look at Mandy's career, she grew up, studied computer science, was a great engineer, ended up today then being the lead technologist at Intel Corporation for a certain kind of chip. Then she went on to becoming the associate director of research. Now, when you look at it, she also finds it necessary to be able to say, how do we encourage more women into science and technology? So each person that I meet who has done this, who has been privileged, wants to do something for the other generations to come. The third group of people that I'm taking are very interesting. So Sujata and Aradhana, who were both graduated from IIT also in science, in chemistry and in engineering. Then they both went through this cycle of saying, you have a family, you need to actually get family, make sure you take care of the kids and so on. What they did instead was they both pursued careers in painting and art. And what was interesting about their paintings was that they both had a very scientific approach, and the messages that these paintings gave out were science related. Then Sujata goes back, starts on to a technical career, because she had this peer group that encouraged her to get back over there. And I think these are the examples, these are the kind of people that you look at saying, if a certain number of people have reached a certain stage, if they can be encouraged by the people around them, they are very likely to be able to say 10 more people who are going to be around them. And I think that's the most important thing. So what are the fruits of labor that we see at the end of all of this? It is that saying that the mentorship helps. I have a great mentor who's a great MD, PhD, and so on. But I didn't just get up because she was a great mentor. I met her because she was doing diligence on a company. And at the end of the day, we developed a bond where I found that she found a joy in being able to mentor me, and I found somebody that I could look upon to be able to guide me through a certain, especially difficult times. So when our company went through very tough times, I had a great board, but the best board member that I had was this woman mentor who would actually make sure that I was all right and being able to take on the next challenge without any problem. So I think that's the value of having mentors who are accomplished, who are able to then guide you to the next steps. Women at top helps. So I think if you have larger women at the top, I think it'll really help in pushing it down. And the reason I say that with confidence is that I've run 2 companies, and the second company when I started, we had 80% women in the company and 20% were men. Today I'm trying to change that gender imbalance. So trying to make it more 50-50. But what happens is that if you have a large number of women at the top, you're likely to see more of a similar set falling down to the next levels. So you have to then bring in the gender equality over there. In most organizations, it's the other way around, because women usually come in at the bottom. And as a result, what you would see is the woman for diversity kind of person who comes in. But what you really want to do is, if you build organizations with women at the top, you are more likely than not to be able to build an organization that has a good representation of women across the company. But you have to be careful of not letting it dominate. So how do we then, you've created these seeds of inspiration, you've got this fruits of labor, but how do you actually make this to really work well? And I think for that, you have to get it spread like forest fire, you need the right kind of ambassadors like what Miracle is doing or other organizations in this space are doing. And beyond doing what we can do a little, you have to make sure that there are more mentors, there are more role models. We make science cool. I think some of the worst things to happen is to have some of the videos about science, and I think some of you might have seen that, is to have these very videos on science and women in science, but to have a huge sexual bias in that. And I think we have to make sure that whatever we do, it has to be something that connects with women, but it should also be something that is not so gender specific. And I think it should make women find science more engaging as a child. The second is that I think if you have more women leaders, and I'm glad to see women leaders, more and more women leaders sitting over here, I think they will make a difference in terms of being able to create the right kind of people more interested in STEM. But more importantly, I think if we had all understood that there were 47 Nobel laureates who actually are women, and many of them came from STEM, which most of us don't know, except Marie Curie and a few others, I think we would all be much more prouder of that. So I think in the end, I will just leave it with two quotes from the wisdom tree. The first is my most favorite person who I obviously didn't have a chance to meet, is Marie Curie. She won the Nobel Prize twice. And I think she said, there is nothing in life to be feared, it is only to be understood. And now is the time to understand more, so we fear less. And I think that is a very powerful quote when you think about it from a point of view of saying, if we all wanted to understand more about science, about technology, about engineering, we are very likely to see that going to have an influence. And the second thing is, I think we all, Sharon is another friend who's CEO of Astia. And it's an interesting organization where it tries to fund more women. And one of the things she said is you really have to stop having people to fix you up through mentorship programs, through programs and mentoring and all this stuff. You're ready now. And now is your time, and this is your call to action. And I think the good thing about this is that even though these are the kind of things they want to do, I think what the message that comes out is saying, at the end of the day, you are responsible for what you can be. And not only that, you're more responsible for people that will come after you. You're more responsible for your daughters, for all the kids that come after that. So I think with that, I'd like to end my talk, and thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Gloria from Mexico. Everybody happy here? I hope so. I really was impressed by, you said you were empowered, I suppose it's your family, who told you the decision is yours, and so are the consequences. And you said that this single phrase has been of empowerment to you. Can you please elaborate, and how would you suggest that we empower the girls around us with such a mentality?
So so I'll give you some examples of what happened when I was a child. I was always an extremely, excited child, a hyperactive child who wanted to do a lot of stuff. And one of the things I did was to sign up for some quiz on science or something like that, and I won a prize. Now, obviously, my dad knew that this was a fake, one of those not so, the right kind of things, but the letter came to me and it said, if you deposit 70 rupees or whatever at that time equivalent, you will then be able to win this great grand prize that you're going to get. When my father then encouraged me, I said, I want to go and get this prize. And he said, fine. He came with me to the post office. We deposited the money, and we got the prize. The prize was a revolving a mixer. And when I put it on, when we turned it on, we put in water, and the water sprinkled all around, right? So it was a defective piece. So one of the first things that my dad told me was, he said, it was not that I didn't know what this would be. He said, you're very lucky you didn't get stones. And the second thing he said, and you also look at the way the mixer is turning, you can actually get a sprinkle of water. So whenever you feel like taking a shower, you do this. So I think it was the kind of response to what he told me. It was that he knew about it, but he said, if you do not understand that a decision that you make is yours and the consequence is going to be yours, you will always keep thinking that I'm going to be the one that is going to look after you. And I think those are important. Those are small little stories, but they make a big difference when you grow up, because after that, every time I made a decision, it was mine to think about, saying, is this something that I'm going to look at as the next step? When I said I want to, he would also, the other things that he would do with me as a child was to record my interviews every summer and ask me questions about what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do. And he would do it as a professional. I think those things when you are 6 years old and 7 years old till 12, I think that's the time that you really feel very proud to be able to speak out there and be able to say, you know, I want to study physics, I want to win the Nobel Prize. He never doubted that for a second. And I think we have to give our kids that freedom to say, I can do anything in this world. I'll be able to change anything in this world. So for instance, I have 2 daughters. One of the things I keep telling them is, you know, first thing my dad wrote in their diary was saying, you're born to change the world. Right? And I try to encourage that and make sure that, you know, they also think the same way. I think that's the thing, that when, as a child, if your parents can be confident about who you are, I think that makes a big difference. The second big difference, I think, is teachers. Even your teachers make a big difference. I had a physics teacher who at the age of 12 or 13 made physics so interesting that it supplemented what I could do at home. And I think for me, most people don't realize that if you have that right one teacher in science, you are going to be so fascinated, because you'll have those little things to play around with. All the toys that you get at home, for us at least, everything was, you know, do it yourself. We would make a radio, you'd set it up, you'd do something like that. It was never for a moment, you're not doubting yourself. And if you start doubting yourself, I think that's where the problem begins. When you grow up, you'll figure out whether it was, you know, the right thing or not. But as a child, you have to have the luxury to dream.